Hello and welcome to justindwyerartistry. Today we're going to be looking at using a palette knife to paint a picture, and we're also going to look at how atmospheric perspective will help us find depth in our paintings. So thanks for watching and enjoy the show. Let's get cracking. To start the painting off, I'm mixing titanium white with phthalo blue and roughly mapping out the sky. I'm using a big brush and just filling in the canvas. I clean the brush and mix yellow ochre with a small amount of titanium white and map out the sand areas. Continuing on with this colour, I loosely fill in the shapes of the rocky outcrops in the sea. I take some pure yellow ochre and thin it down with turpentine and overlay some of the darker areas in the sand and rocks. I mix some phthalo green and phthalo blue with titanium white and mark out the ocean. I will paint this darker than the sky, and it will bring the ocean forward and begin to give the painting depth. Next, I mix some white into the colour I used for the ocean, and I add some variation to the ocean's surface. I also do this for the sky. Adding more of the white to the sky will push it back, creating a deeper space in the painting. I work around the shapes of the rocks with the lightened blue. I make the bottom and centre of the sky lighter while leaving the top corners dark. I then blend the lighter and darker areas together to give the sky a smooth finish. Adding more white to objects far away is recreating a phenomenon called aerial perspective. Aerial perspective, or atmospheric perspective as it can also be called, is the effect of the atmosphere on a distant object. The further away an object is, the less detail is visible and the less contrast between the object and its background. The light is disrupted by a process called scattering. Molecules of air, water and smoke interfere with the light travelling from the sun into the Earth's atmosphere. Short wavelengths are scattered more efficiently, and this is what gives the sky its blue colour. When looking at objects, you are perceiving the light that is reflecting off that object. The further away the object is, the more interference the light will experience from the particles in the atmosphere. This both reduces the saturation of the colour and the level of clarity and detail of the object. Artists have recognised and used this to create a sense of depth in their paintings from as far back as 30 BCE in Roman frescoes. The Romans decorated their houses with light, airy paintings to give their dark and windowless rooms the appearance of space and illumination. During the Renaissance period, artists such as Leonardo da Vinci used aerial perspective in many of their paintings. Not all artists use this method creating space in their work, artists such as Raphael preferring to work in flatter, more stylistic manners. I clean the brush and mix more titanium white into the sand mix. I blend the lightened yellow over the sand areas and start to add some areas of highlight to the rock outcrops. I'm still using very loose brush strokes here. I just add layers of slightly thicker paint over thin paint and observe how the layers blend. I mix brown out of lamp black, cadmium red and phthalo blue. Using the palette knife, I drag thick layers of brown over the surface of the rock formations. Using a very light touch, the thick paint will slide off the knife in broken patches. This will represent the shadows on the irregular surface of the rocks. As I paint, I grab different colours to vary the areas of shadow. I take different amounts of the red and blue and layer them in to create different values in the dark areas on the rocks. I clean the knife on a rag and grab some of the light sand colour. I start to add highlights to the rocks to counter the dark areas I just added. I want to create a strong contrast in the rocks, as this will draw the eye to the focal point of the painting. I use the knife like a brush, dabbing paint on the canvas in small areas and dragging long strokes across the painting. Returning to the dark paint, I mark out the deepest shadows of the painting. I create a spire of lamp black and phthalo blue on the right-hand side rock formation, building up areas and finalising the shape of the rock. I mix cadmium red, cadmium yellow and a small amount of titanium white. I apply a small amount of this to the rocks to vary the colour. It will act as a focal point against the strong blue background of the sky. As I apply each layer of paint, I allow some of it to blend and fade into the background colour. This will help tie the colours together and create the appearance of different surfaces, all reflecting varying amounts of light. I take some titanium white and use the knife to mark out the whitecaps of the waves breaking along the shore. I take fresh paint periodically and sometimes allow the paint to blend in with the colours of the ocean. This creates the impression of breaking waves without creating a uniform white stripe across the painting. I allow the white at the top of the sea to blend in more with the ocean colour. This will push the top of the sea back while bringing the pure whites at the bottom forward. And now, a quick note on the history of palette knives. Palette knives have long been in use for mixing and handling paint. The word was first recorded around 1750 and was referring to a round-ended spatula with a thin blade used by artists for mixing, applying and scraping off paint. Even before this, artists were using knives to apply paint in a manner called impasto. Impasto is a technique where artists apply thick layers of paint to a surface to create physical texture. The artists who use this technique include the Italian painter Titian and the Dutch master Rembrandt. Rembrandt would apply thick layers of white paint to the canvas through a variety of means, including palette knives. He would then paint thin glazes of transparent colour over the top to allow the finished work to have a glowing, luminous finish. In time, more specialised painting knives were created for this purpose. These were the small trowel-shaped implements that are commonly found today. The first known use of painting knives is in the work of British painter Constable in the early 1800s. Modern knives are made of steel, but early ones were made from various materials including ivory, wood and bone. Constable's work was an inspiration to many of the modern painters, including the Impressionists who used impasto techniques to apply small dabs of colour to represent light in the natural world. This group included the French painter Cézanne, who has been dubbed by some as the father of modern art. Many modern artists have used palette knives to great effect across many styles and genres, including the Dutch painter Vincent van Gogh and the French artist Henri Matisse in the 20th century. In more recent times, television artists such as the American Bob Ross and the Australian Anne Doe have further popularised the use of painting knives in painting. I take some of the browns and yellow used in the rocks and sand and start to build up a section of reflection across the beach. I use a variety of colours to indicate an imperfect reflection. I'm just filling in shapes of colour and am not attempting to replicate any specific area of the rocks. I add some sky colour to the reflections. I just loosely mark them in. Again, there is no need for detail. This is just to create the impression of something reflecting off the wet surface of the sand. I add a small amount of blue to the darker areas. This will add to the impression of water bouncing light around. Mixing some phthalo green in with some of the sky colour, I make a green colour to represent the grassy areas on top of the rocks. I mix more of the ocean colour and tidy up some of the sections around the base of the rocks. Adding varying amounts of white to the mix, I add in some additional detail to the ocean. I also add some of this colour to the reflection on the beach. I mix some phthalo blue with a tiny bit of deep cadmium red and titanium white. I add this colour to the stones in the deepest areas of shadow. I also add some reflections to the sand. I add some more deep cadmium red to the colour and achieve a violet. I keep adding this to the shadows on the rocks. The violet will pick up and complement the yellows on the rocks and in the sand on the beach. I'm using the knife now to draw in some detail in the rocks and tightening up the shapes. Adding in the violet pushes the rocks back a little bit and neutralises the shadows slightly. This creates an impression of a slight loss of focus in the glaring light of the beach while still drawing the eye. I can sacrifice some contrast in the middle ground to add more depth to the painting while keeping the focal point strong. I add to the highlights on the rocks and to the reflection on the beach. I keep looking at the painting and assessing the balance of colours and tone. I add to or take away from the contrast wherever something stands out as not being quite right. I keep adding in details now with the sharp edge of the knife. I'm focusing on creating the appearance of the striations in the rock, not precise or exact details, just building up textures and working more details into the lights and darks. Finally, I take some sky colour and add more titanium white. I mark out some vague shapes in the background to create the impression of clouds low on the horizon. This adds further detail to the painting and adds another layer of depth. I overlay some titanium white and blend it into the clouds and the beach reflection to add some highlights. That's it, the painting is done. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And have a wonderful day, and bye-bye.